Welcome everybody, and just start as I often do by thanking you all for your time, dedication to this critically important issue of connecting New Yorkers to internet service and expanding access throughout the state. I'm going to provide an update on two of our key federally funded programs that require publishing key documents for public comment. There are three documents or two documents, one of which is in two sections. I'm going to go through them fairly quick. This is not going to be a substitute for looking through the documents. They can be quite dense, but wanted to use this opportunity to provide a roadmap to the documents and open the floor to thoughts, concerns, questions. Anything that you note in the documents will highlight how to submit a public comment, and you should know that these are draft documents. So the purpose of public comment is not to present you the final draft, but to note that it's still a work in progress, and your input here is a critical part of that. We have, as you'll see, done our best to synthesize inputs across New York's wonderfully diverse stakeholders across every region, across different market segments of the broadband industry. We think we've done a good job with that. But if you find things that you think could be improved, or if you find particular things you want to celebrate, we want to hear about it. I will start with an overview of ConnectALL. Could we bring up the slides, Richie? Okay, so again, broadband deployment initial proposal and program updates. I'll also be providing some notes on our digital equity plan. Next slide. So this is how I'll go through it. Provide a brief overview for anyone who's somewhat new to ConnectALL or as a refresher. Then I'll review the state digital equity plan, which is open for public comment. Then I'll review the broadband deployment initial proposal, which is in 2 volumes, as I said. Describe the public comment phase, brief mentions of our program updates, and then open it for question and discussion. Next slide. Okay, next slide. So the ConnectALL program, as many of you are aware, includes 5 signature programs that the governor announced. Broadband deployment program is what you'll be seeing the initial proposal relate to today. The digital equity program, that you'll see the state digital equity plan today. Our affordable housing connectivity program and municipal infrastructure program I'll have brief updates on, and connectivity innovation is still in development. Next slide. So these programs are funded through 3 main sources. Richard, can you advance? The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act has 2 programs, BEAD, which is Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program. So the BEAD initial proposal is what's open for public comment. The State Digital Equity Program, again, the results of that planning grant is what you'll see that's open for public comment. We also have funding from the American Rescue Plan Act and the New York State budget, totaling over $1.3 billion of public funding that we're responsible for stewarding across our programs. Next. The purpose, as a reminder, and this comes as authorized by the New York State Legislature and the Wired Broadband Act, is access to high-speed, reliable, and affordable broadband for all New Yorkers. The digital divide disproportionately affects marginalized populations, so we are seeking digital equity to have broadband access available and useful for all. And finally, a robust and competitive internet marketplace that supports economic development and benefits New Yorkers. So, it goes beyond making sure that everybody has at least one connection and can connect to that, but really to making sure that everybody throughout the state is well served by our digital infrastructure. Next slide. So our program timeline is driven largely by those three federal funding sources. And you can see where we are today is in that 30-day public comment period that cuts across our digital equity program and our BEAD program. So we aligned the public comment for our draft digital equity plan, our draft initial proposal, in order to facilitate engagement with stakeholders. So that's why we're presenting them together today. And public comment will be open until December 6th. And then you can see that funding will be available from the digital equity program in 2024. And ultimately, after we go through our grant program and submit that in the form of our final proposal, the funding from the BEAD program will be available in 2025. Capital projects funds are available sooner. Next. So the state digital equity plan, and again, this will just be an overview. Really doesn't take the place of reading through the plan. And really, what I'm going to provide is a structure to the plan. You can go to the next slide. But a lot of what you'll find in this document is actually incredibly useful data on a regional basis and by specific populations. A more statistically representative assessment of the current state of broadband than we've ever had. So I really encourage you to dive into it for that purpose. You see the different sections that you can go through and you can comment on the vision, current state, our principles for stakeholder engagement, and our implementation, which is really a set of high-level strategies and key activities, but it's not the specific detail of the program because we do not yet know the amount of federal funding we'll receive, or the rules that will be attached to that funding. So what you'll find is really a high-level approach to implementation. Next slide. So with many of you all, and thank you for the support, we've been engaged across the state, working with digital equity coalitions in every region to conduct focus groups, public listening sessions, and as I said, conduct the first ever statistically representative digital equity survey across the state to provide a current state assessment and a baseline for the work that we'll be doing within this program over the coming years. Next. The requirements from our funding agencies specify 8 covered populations, and we've identified additional stakeholders that we've engaged through this process. And again, the survey is representative of those covered populations across the regions. And again, working with our digital equity coalition partners and many government partners has been key to reaching these hard to reach populations, hard to reach in terms of connecting them to the internet, and of course hard to reach in terms of getting survey responses, but we did achieve that goal. Next slide. So the outcome areas, so this is really the purpose for people to be using broadband, and this is key because we can measure people getting connected, but we really want to see is outcomes along the lines of economic and workforce opportunity, improvement in educational opportunities, improvements in access to health services, increased civic and social engagement, increasing just that that human connectivity that's so critical, and the delivery of government services and other essential services through the internet. So we're looking to next slide. So what you'll see in the digital equity plan, the structure is in the first 4 chapters, you see the results of our data collection. So needs assessment, the asset inventory. So key digital inclusion assets in every region and across the state. What are some of the key gaps? What are the challenges that people are facing? And an assessment of the stakeholder engagement that we've done. So that's where you'll see a lot of that incredibly robust data. And then I laid out those 5 outcome areas, and the implementation describes key performance indicators within each one of those, and how to then structure our impact metrics strategies towards achieving those measurable objectives in each outcome area. So you'll see that alignment where we've defined high-level strategies, and use those to identify potential activities oriented towards addressing the needs and building on our strengths in terms of the asset inventory. Next slide. So how to use the digital equity plan. So that's, as I said, this is, certainly you have the opportunity to comment, but some of the unique things it offers in terms of resources is the digital equity asset inventory. So this is, we're going to be building on this to develop it into a directory of resources. So take a look at it. It's in the form of a table that you see on the lower right there. So you can work through it, identify the types of things types of assets and institutions that are on there, and if you have suggestions for additional things to include, please add that in a comment. Use the regional snapshots. So this is, again, data that you can factor into your planning and assessment and understand particular needs. It may not come as a surprise to many of you who've been working on this, but these snapshots also may be useful for you continuing to engage other stakeholders in your region. And lastly, if you haven't already done so, we encourage you to connect with the Digital Equity Coalition in your region to continue to increase coordination and promote civic engagement on these issues. So those Digital Equity Coalitions have been a great resource to us, and we encourage you to engage them as a resource as well. Next slide. And this is contact information. You don't have to get out your pen and paper now. We'll share this, and you can always ask us for assistance making a connection here to the key points of contact for the coalitions in each region. And next slide. So again, you can use this QR code. We'll circulate it. You can go to our website. You can find how to submit a comment, and public comment will be open through December 6th. And I'll get back to comments after we go through the initial proposal. Next slide. So the broadband deployment initial proposal, and again, this is the actual framework. So NTIA is kind of funny, and now they make us do a plan, which is really an assessment, and then they make us do a proposal, which is really the plan. So this is much more the detailed approach to how we will roll out our funding in this regard. Next slide. So the things you'll see in the initial proposal, which is one of the requirements to receive funding, is the MAP challenge process. So this is, many of you participated in the federal challenge process. This is a state challenge process. So the initial proposal describes our approach there. The way that we'll define project areas that will be available for applications from insurance service providers, how we will determine eligibility and what our criteria is for selecting those grant recipients, and the kinds of things that we will require of them. You can go to the next slide. And this is the roadmap for the $664.6 million in federal funding that's been allocated to New York State for this purpose. We are applying these digital equity principles across all the work that we're doing. So it's always a good reminder to that equity, performance, choice, affordability, safety are key principles that, as I said, all have to be met for us to have a robust and equitable broadband marketplace. Next. In addition to the digital equity engagement, we continue to work with many of you, work with other governments, tribal governments, engaged industry, internet service providers in every region of every size, talk to workforce development organizations, other stakeholders, and continue to work with you all on a local and regional basis. And again, thank you for all of your input along the way. Next. So as part of the initial proposal, we've identified, and these were in the 5-year action plan, specific ways that we will apply the federal funding to achieve measurable objectives that relate to our 3 goals. So when we talk about connecting all residents and businesses, we are talking about using the BEAD funding to connect all households and businesses by 2030, so addressing all unserved and underserved locations. And we are setting a goal of expanding rural cellular coverage, because that is a critical need, and we've heard that from many of you all, although the federal funding is not for that purpose. But we're going to continue to keep our eyes on that. We have other programs. We're increasing consumer choice and expanding the robust marketplace in New York. And again, the statewide mobilization with partners like you all and many others to end the digital divide and address digital inclusion and digital equity needs. Next. As a reminder, and I won't dwell on this, but it's more just again, a note that we've tried to provide as clear a document as we can while meeting the federal requirements and speaking the language that they require us to speak. So there are many terms of art in there. There's an acronym guide in our documents at the front. So where we use a lot of acronyms, you can just flip to the front to be reminded what those are. But these are some of the other key terms. The thing to remember is that the ConnectALL office, the state of New York, is the eligible entity. Subgrantees are who you might think of as our grantees, who we will be funding. Those are probably the 2 just key things to keep in mind. Next, and NTIA is the funding agency from the Department of Commerce. So the purpose of this funding is to reach unserved and underserved locations across the state. And the requirement is a plan for that funding that does in fact reach, or will in fact reach, all of those locations. Now, I think we all know that in part because of the great work that we've done in the state, addressing many locations, and the mapping efforts that you all have done and continue to do, it is always going to be a challenge to zero in on those locations. So the key thing is that the locations have to be locations on the FCC map. And then we can use the state challenge process to identify ones that might be incorrectly categorized on the map. But we encourage you to be in communication with us about any data you have and about continuing to make challenges to the FCC map where possible, or just to have an understanding of how your data aligns with our understanding. Currently, the map shows about 149,000 unserved and 37,000 underserved locations, but that's going to change. We've talked to a number of internet service providers who are updating their data based on our conversations. There's continued building. There's also going to be the removal of locations that have existing funding commitments. So that data is going to go, those numbers we expect overall to go down. And again, we continue to try to zero in on the most accurate location-based map that we can have, so that by the time we finish this process, we've addressed the needs of those locations. Next slide. So volume 1 includes the description of the current state, definition of community anchor institutions. In some states, there will be funding to also address the needs of those anchor institutions. We frankly don't expect, because of the way that the federal rules are written, and the amount of funding we received, and the challenging terrain that we have to address, that will have additional funding for that. Nevertheless, it's important to have that information, because that is clearly a goal that we should have, to make sure that all of our community anchor institutions that support the use and adoption of broadband have robust connectivity themselves. So continuing to refine that definition and identify that state will continue to inform the long-term goals that we set as a program. And then lastly, the challenge process by which the state will finalize the list of unserved and underserved locations. And that will be something that you all have a role to play, as we'll get into. And then next slide, volume 2. Volume 2 is really what describes how we will make the grant awards. So that gets into the subgrantee selection process, how we will define project areas, how we will score applications, the labor standards will apply, things that we can do to reduce costs and deployment barriers, and other requirements as relate to service plans, climate risk assessment, and other compliance. So that's how the 2 volumes break up. Next. So again, this is the timeline. This is something we have in there, but the key thing is that ultimately the timeline is based on approvals from NTIA, the federal funding agency. So once we submit our initial proposal and they approve it, we can kick off our challenge process. So we expect that to happen beginning about in February, and then that's overall about a 90-day process. And then once that's finished, we'll have the final list of eligible locations, and we'll use that to determine the project grant areas and put those out for applications. And then obviously once we receive the applications, we move through the scoring phase. We are required to complete the entire process and get to final awards to submit in our final proposal within 1 year of the date that our initial proposal is approved. So there's never been a grant program like this that targets 100% of locations. We have a lot of the hardest to hard to reach in our state. And we have a short timeline in which to get this done, essentially 9 months, because the challenge process is prescribed to be pre-90 days. So we have basically 9 months to make all these grant awards. Next slide. So this is, and you saw something like this when we talked about the challenge process with many of you earlier. The process by which we determine the eligible locations. So we begin as required with the FCC map. So Congress has required that we start with the federal map, not the state one. We identify community anchor institutions; those are listed in the initial proposal. We remove funded locations. The funding programs are included in an appendix in the initial proposal, and we're continuing to gather input from many of you all. And thank you for the work that you've done identifying locations and making awards where you have the funding and willing partners to do so. We can make other pre-challenge modifications. So in this case, we've included one item from NTIA that they proposed as an option of classifying DSL, old digital subscriber line service, where it's claimed to have broadband speeds because of the nature of that technology. We can propose to classify that as underserved, and then it would really be on the internet service provider to challenge those locations and give us the evidence to confirm their claim that it actually meets the broadband definition. Well, once we've done all those steps, we'll publish the preliminary location list, run the challenge process. So the challenge process, as we'll describe, we'll get into that in a second. And then based on the results of the challenge process, we'll get to the final list. So these are all the steps that are described in the document. Next slide. So the types of challenges are described in the document. I don't need to go through all this, but the idea is, look at how this is described. Think about the type of information that you have. Think about the type of evidence that you would want to submit, because only governments, nonprofit organizations, and internet service providers will be eligible to submit challenges. We are planning to have a process by which members of the public can submit comments, which then you'd be able to view and consider those in your challenges. But ultimately, we're going to be looking to accept challenges from many of you all. And if you have evidence and information, you want to look at this list and see if it's clear to you how your evidence fits with these challenge types. And if it's not, you submit a comment and suggest how we would change it or what you would like us to attempt to accommodate within the boundaries of the rules set up by the feds. Next slide. Again, we note community or institution definition. So, what we have to do is set certain categories. Categories have to be related to how they facilitate the greater use of broadband service by vulnerable populations. So, if you think our description or the way we've applied that description is lacking, then please submit a comment. But generally, what we would be looking for. Could be particular institutions that are missing from the list. Also, just the general category that we would want to add, and we'd want to have address information and current broadband status information. Next. Area and MDU challenges. So you can comment on how we approach connected community anchor institutions. You'll also be able to challenge those definitions and the status. The way that an area MDU challenge, this is critical for many of you to consider, because an area challenge or an MDU challenge is where multiple challenges within a particular building or census block group can, if they all go in against the same provider in that region or in that location, then that essentially flips the entire area, or MDU is a multiple dwelling unit, apartment building. It flips it to where the burden of proof now goes to the internet service provider to demonstrate that, in fact, they do serve all of the locations or any subset of locations in that area. So for you, this can be a powerful tool to requiring more evidence of internet service providers, particularly if you have long-time knowledge or direct information on an area that shows is served on the map, but in fact is not served or is not served in a way that meets the definition of broadband. Next slide. Another key area for you to consider, I know we've talked about this a bit before, but you can there's not tremendous specificity on this because we are still looking to finalize the locations, but we will have to set geographic boundaries for the project areas, for the grant areas, and these will be the areas within which we will ask for proposals to serve all the locations. Now, we're considering doing that on a county-wide basis. A benefit of that is it allows for economies of scale, both for the applicant preparing the application, doing the process. It also simplifies our process to review grant awards. On the other hand, that could be too large for some applicants. So we want to try and have the most competitive process possible. So we're also looking at ways to create divisions within counties, as many of you county leaders have done in your proposals. Whether it's a highway or a body of water, that would be an effective division. So please let us know if you've got thoughts on those grant areas. Secondary coverage percentage, we get into this a bit more into what I think is the next slide. But in any grant area, there's going to tend to be a small percentage of locations, less than 1 out of 20, that's going to result in to contribute to as much as half of the total project cost. So, as a matter of policy and as a matter of most effectively using the federal funds we have, we're creating a way to identify those particular locations so that we can still bring fiber optic connectivity to the remaining locations in the area. So you should look at the plan and see if that's clear, because I think we all share the goal of maximizing the number of locations that are connected with robust, future-proof wired connectivity. Other locations will be addressed through alternate technologies, including potentially satellite. But we want to reserve that for the truly hardest to serve locations in the state. And then lastly, we also will use an internal assessment of what we think the pricing should be as a way to encourage cost-effective applications to be most competitive. So we have a sense of what we should be spending, and we expect the internet service providers to meet or go under those amounts, and that will inform. Next slide. The determination was called the extremely high cost per location threshold. So this is essentially the average cost per location, above which we don't think it's economically feasible or feasible within the bounds of the program to fund for fiber coverage. So projects will be all have averages below that threshold, and then the locations that are not doable below that threshold will be ones where we'll consider the secondary coverage percentages and alternative technologies like fixed wireless or satellite. But we won't set that location until we get all the proposals in. In a wonderful world, we will get wonderful proposals for 100% of every grant area we put out there. And the total of that will total right up to $664.6 million in grant funding. And and that will be the end of the process. But if that doesn't happen, we'll set that threshold and start looking at secondary coverages and other technologies that might be more cost effective or lower cost, I should say. Next slide. Applicant requirements, again, this is too voluminous to go through, but we will be requiring significant amounts of information, including past performance, their workforce readiness, approach to MWBE contracting, labor standards and protection, both state standards and federal standards, and then other required items like a low-cost service option, an approach to middle-class affordability, non-discrimination, civil rights, cybersecurity, and supply chain risk management. So we'll go through a couple of those items next. But the thing to keep in mind of those requirements is, you can comment to say we should ask different information. Of course, we want to, not be overly burdensome, but we certainly want to take in the required information. And there's some things that are, we can require in the information, other things that will factor into the scoring. So in the scoring phase, we will look at, from that initial information, their technical capability, their managerial capability, their fitness, et cetera. And again, the question that you might consider is, what should we require from all applicants? What type of information should we be collecting? Next. Scoring criteria is, of course, critical, and is one of the challenging things is that we have only a small amount of leeway here. So the primary criteria are required, those three categories, and they have to total 75 points. We can determine the allocation within 75 points across those three. So you can see that the minimal BEAD program outlay is, primarily the cost in relation to that benchmark, 30 points. The commitment to provide the most affordable total price for 1 gigabit per second service, 15 points. And the federal fair labor compliance is 30 points. In the secondary criteria, we have to include speed to deployment. We've given that 1 because we expect all the projects to be completed within a reasonable amount of time, namely the 4-year target set by the program. Local and tribal government coordination. So this is obviously something that directly concerns you all, many of you all. We've highlighted the role of county governments to provide support. You can see how the scoring will work out in that context, or where counties have not indicated that support, what types of other documentation would count for those points. So, you should be in communication at the county level and thinking about how you might make the determination of providing a letter of support for the share of those points. We have added additional workforce and job quality requirements or criteria. So we'll be collecting additional information. And really the goal here is to, account for, just to promote the, equitable economic benefit of these grants and these programs by creating, jobs and maintaining a high standard and, not, frankly, not punishing anybody who cuts corners, not rewarding anybody who cuts corners on that, but balancing out for how that might ultimately affect the cost of the program. And then lastly, 14 points for open access commitments. This is in consideration of the fact that we do not want to have to deploy broadband infrastructure to any of these areas again. So open access would allow for this one deployment to serve multiple operators. It also would allow for us to draw on these investments for future cellular coverage. So those are the types of things we're looking for in awarding these additional 14 points. We think that would be tremendous value to the state, to the regions, to the locations that are being served this way. So we've put 14 points in there to encourage applicants using that business model and approach to deployment. So that totals 25, and that's how we get to 100 points. So, again, look at these considerations in the plan. Next. Low-cost broadband service option. This is a requirement. In other words, NTIA requires that we require it from all sub-grantees. But the thing to keep in mind is this is not a statewide standard. This will only apply to the locations that are being served. So, it's a it's a portion of the 100 to 150,000 or so locations that would be eligible for this low-cost broadband service. And in trying to find a price point, as we're required to do, I will say that our main consideration was that we don't want to discourage an internet service provider that already has looked with great concern at the business feasibility of serving these locations. So we've talked to a number of service providers, and we set that at $65, and it would remain at that for 10 years following the grant. Beyond the grant period. Next. Cost and barrier reduction, where is another required section. We've identified certain activities, look through and think if we've got them right. This section might be something of greater interest to internet service providers, but as you think about what might be most helpful, this is an area to put it in. What could ConnectALL be doing to further address the timeline and feasibility for broadband deployment in your areas? Next. So just coming back to what we're doing now, which is the public comment process. In Q1 to Q2 of 2024 is when we'll have that state challenge process, and then for internet service providers, you can apply for, collaborate with entities applying for grant funds. And then ultimately, when we do the final proposal, that will also be, I believe, available for public comment. One thing that I didn't mention that has come up for a number of you all, and we might have opportunity to talk about this further. We're going to be adding in language about consortium applications with the goal of accounting for instances where you may have already done an RFP, maybe using some of your ARPA funding, and identified internet service providers across your county. Ideally, we would like to have a process by which a county that wanted to play this role could take those internet service providers and form that package into a consortium proposal and apply directly to this program so that BEAD would be able to fund those particular internet service providers across the entire area and address all the unserved and underserved locations in, for example, a county. So that's something that we are looking to add, and I welcome your feedback on that as well. So that, again, in some cases there may be a very direct role for somebody to play when we open the grant process, and then of course, you will also be. We expect and certainly hope that applicants will be coming to you all to talk about what they're looking to do and why you should offer them a letter of support. And we've incentivized that because we think your input is incredibly valuable. We think that there should be continued strengthening the relationships at the local and regional level. Next, I think we're just going to go through a little bit on public comment, and then we'll have some time for question and answer. Okay, public comment. Next. You can go to the website. We're doing events like this one, presentations. Again, it's a lot of information. It's mostly just to give you a general sense of what you'll find when you dive into the documents, and we certainly hope you do. You can find those on our website, and then you can find links to the comments. And there are two separate platforms, so make sure you're commenting on the right document, or comment on both documents, but two separate platforms for that. And we encourage you to circulate these documents and let people know that they can submit comments. This is a great opportunity to continue building, as I said, civic engagement around this topic, which we know so many people care deeply about, and we want these documents to help deepen and those conversations that have been ongoing. Next slide, I think, is the link. Oh no, okay. What makes a good comment? Yes, good advice to think about. So specificity. Anything you can refer directly to the document is going to be most helpful to us as we evaluate the comment and consider making changes to the document. So specificity, obviously being constructive. We are very thick-skinned, and as I said, the goal here is to present a draft and get feedback. But if there are things you like, you should make that known as well. I don't think you want to risk that somebody else provides negative feedback, and we don't hear about things that you actually like and want to preserve or enhance. And then, of course, to the extent that you can, just share your perspective, why you see things a certain way, how it would affect you if it plays out that way. We have done our level best to synthesize the input we've gotten, to balance the impacts on an incredibly diverse array of stakeholders. But we want to hear from you if you think that we've not anticipated certain impacts of the work that we've done, and what we proposed in the drafts. Next. And again, you can follow this link. We'll send this document out, or just go to our website, broadband.ny.gov, and it's linked from the top. You can find the plans, Digital Equity Plan, Initial Proposal Volume 1, Volume 2, links to the comment platform, all on our website. And next, I think it's Q&A. No, ConnectALL program updates. Why don't I just pause there, though? Rich, you can come off the main screen, go back to, maybe I'll see the gallery. Before I get into some program updates, which are just brief, I just want to stop there because that was a lot of information I rolled through. And just want to see if anybody has any questions at this point. You can use the raise hand function. It is remotely conceivable to me that I was clear enough and all that. It's also conceivable that you're taking my advice, and what you're going to do is, following this, you're going to download the documents and dive into it, and then we'll hear from you if you've got any questions or comments. Well, I'm going to assume that, okay. All right, think about if you've got any other questions. We'll come back to it, and I'll just hit those program updates. Richard, can you bring us back to that screen? Okay, next slide. So we continue to take in opt-in survey responses from building owners across the state, and we continue to ask your support in getting the word out. Where we have over 40,000 units in the program pipeline. We want to get up to retrofitting 100,000 units. 40,000 is enough for us to get started, and we'll be doing that soon, which will mean we'll open applications to internet service providers. And it'll be in a two-step process. So once we've identified internet service providers that have a quality approach in a particular service area where there's a density of affordable and public housing, then we'll take portfolios of the buildings and units that are in our program that have opted in, and we'll open those to those service providers to submit proposals on. So this is a great way to bring investment to urban areas or anywhere where there's affordable and public housing, increase consumer choice, increase job opportunities. So we encourage you to help us get the word out, and let us know if you've got any questions about how to do that, and stay tuned again for that application opening up. Thank you for your comment, Mayor AC. Next slide. Speaking of Village of Sherburne, we've completed with NYPA, with our partners DANK and Southern Tier Network, and Sherburne Electric Utility, Town of Nichols, Diana, Pitcairn. We've these pilot projects are construction and are really off to a great start, and we appreciate how our partners in Sherburne and Nichols have gotten the word out and have already exceeded our targets for take rate in terms of the number of households that are already making use of this service and have signed up. So our board has approved program guidelines for expanding on these pilots to launch our municipal infrastructure program, and we'll be primarily looking for shovel-ready projects to build public open access fiber infrastructure. If you look through the guidelines, and we're happy to send those around, you'll see that there's a lot of flexibility for how a government entity might approach a public-private partnership or the deployment. But the key thing is getting a feasible project together. So we encourage you to look at those guidelines and stay tuned for that opening. This is another way where you can directly lead on addressing the needs in your city, in your town, in your region. The key is it's got to meet deliver internet service to homes and businesses. But again, there's a lot of ways to approach the public ownership and publicly controlled approach to fiber. So, our pilots have different models, and these pilot projects have different models, and we encourage you to ask us any questions you might have about that. Look at the guidelines and consider whether this might be a program for you or others in your area. Next slide. And now back to questions and discussions. Okay. Richie, come off. Okay, you can raise your hand, or you can speak up. We're going to stay on the line. Yes, Mayor.
So you mentioned about the public-private partnership part here at the end. How do you see that dialogue going on with the ConnectALL office? Is there a format for that? Is there a place to have that discussion?
You mean in terms of like facilitating relationships with internet service providers?
Yeah, that's what I'm
Um,
trying to.
yeah, it's a good question. You know, I think we have to look at the status of proposals when that opens. You know, our you know, in the case that there are, you know, shovel ready projects that meet the full amount of funding that's allocated, then that will be our focus. But where we, you know, see projects that can either be improved or where there's an opportunity for partnership, you know, we'll then look to build on those. So I would say that you know, if the situation is, you know, you want to do a project, you have identified an area, you know, you think you've got a project that can be completed in the amount of time, but you know there's a missing ingredient or two, you can either submit that as an application or come talk to us about it, and we can facilitate some conversations and relationships. And certainly, you know, we're trying to leverage our role as you know, the state's economic development agency and the broadband agency that has a lot of relationships, without wanting to be you know, too prescriptive or predetermine how a grant application would work out. But you know, the best thing to do is talk to us about what you think your project needs are, and we can identify, you know, if we might have some opportunities. If you think that it would be helpful for us to do that on a more of a kind of like a job fair type of format, or where it's a little bit more open and people can meet each other and build connections. You know, certainly happy to talk about how that could work and how we could provide that support.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? And something that also we can talk about a bit more in Binghamton on Wednesday. I think we'll see you there, and yes, encourage everybody to come and thank you to 7-Tier 8 for organizing the Upstate Broadband Conference. Jen, you want to give a plug for it before we take Laura's question? Go ahead, Jen.
Thank you, Josh. Yes, if this piqued your interest, we'll corner Josh in a room after he offers his keynote speech and hit him up with questions then.
Well, my other colleagues will also be there. We will, you know, many members of our office would be there. It's a great opportunity to engage with stakeholders from across the state, and we thank 7-Tier 8 for organizing and hosting this for the second year. I got to attend before I was officially appointed. It was a great introduction. The conference, can somebody drop the link in? Conference is on Wednesday.
I will do that, and I'll add, you know, in all seriousness with that, Josh will be speaking, Mayor Acey will be speaking, Dave Botar will be leading a session on this public-private partnership. So some of those projects, we'll get into the details of that and how they've been successful. Thank you.
Thanks. Laura?
Yeah, so let me just say, first of all, Josh is eminently cornerable. I mean, I again, thank you for the responsiveness to the questions that I know not only we, but many others have had. So quick question for you. In going through the BEAD funding, I note that there is a 30.64 MWBE requirement, as well as Build America, Buy America requirement. So that could be somewhat challenging in rural areas. Has there been any attempt to kind of, I don't know, maybe cross-pollinate the two to see what resources there might actually be out there to the providers?
Yeah, so thank you, Laura, and just also going to say thank you to anybody who needs to drop at the hour. Appreciate the time. And again, you know, please look at the documents and follow up with us. Generally, there are a number of federal requirements in this program that can make it challenging to some of our small business internet service providers. We've done our best to try and make the program as friendly as possible. Certainly the MWBE requirement is one of the challenges. I'm speaking at the MWBE forum tomorrow, and I'm, you know, open to thoughts about how to, you know, continue to build up that pipeline and increase that capability. Both in terms of, you know, subcontracted work, and for supplies. Supply chain may be a challenge, since every state and territory is going to be implementing programs along these lines simultaneously, and the federal government has been clear on the the Buy America requirement. But the thing on that is that they've been clear on it, and they recognize it as a national issue. So they are, I think, dedicated to. Thank you, Mark. They are dedicated to trying to increase that pipeline in time for when this really kicks off in earnest in 2025 and 2026. So there's not too much we can do as a state, given that requirement and the national impact there. And I don't know if there's another point on, but in terms of MWBE with BEAD, we've got some time to try to build that up. So I think that's one of the things to be thinking about in the next 6 months. But I agree with you. It's these are the most challenging to reach locations in the state, and they present many business challenges, as well as to the just the actual deployment challenges. So Laura, I don't have a magic solution to it, but certainly on MWBE, we want to continue to build those relationships, and I think that is an area where, just like in the public-private partnership department, facilitating general conversations.
Thank you.
But yeah, we're sensitive to this is one of the things we've had to balance is, we want to create a program that's that gets competitive applications for every location in the state. But we also know that for some service providers, between the BEAD rules, the scale of what's available, and the margins that they already operate under in terms of the density, that this may prove too challenging for some internet service providers. So we're trying to balance between those needs. It's one of the challenges of the program for sure. David.
Josh, do you envision that the ISPs will be the primary recipient of the BEAD grants?
Yes, I think that's just in part the nature of how the program was set up by Congress. Certainly the rules, say that it's open to every type of internet service provider. It could be, co-ops, municipalities, small business. But if you just look through it, it's going to favor internet service providers. But that's one of the reasons why, consistent with the mandate from the legislature and the governor, we have these other programs that have a different orientation. And there's also considerable opportunity for partnership between the internet service provider and local governments in some cases. But generally, the recipient of these grant funds will be the entity that's providing service to the locations.
If a county were to go through an RFP process to select an ISP that they want to partner with, and the county's willing to put some actual cash into the project, will that influence the competitive proposal in your office, the review of the proposal in your office?
Yeah, I mean, that would, so we want to add in language that clarifies how that could work, in terms of how that would be a consortium of 2 or more entities. So in that case, either the county could be the supporting partner to the internet service provider, and you could either just write a letter saying we've identified this ISP, or you could be, materially in partnership with that entity that you've already selected, or you can be a sort of a lead applicant flowing down the BEAD requirements through your own contracts and RFP process. I think we want to try and allow for not just that creativity, but that ability to build on the work that many people already have done. But So those are the types of things that we're contemplating trying to do within the BEAD program. And then the municipal infrastructure program allows for other approaches to public-private partnership. Dave, does that answer your question?
Certainly does, and if people would bear with me, if I could ask just one more question. Is there a separate set of rules and process coming out for the Treasury Capital Fund?
Yeah, so we can, if somebody could, I think Kevin pasted a link to a page that has all of our program guidelines. You can look in, or maybe somebody can drop in specifically the municipal infrastructure program guidelines. And the way that ESD programs work is we publish our guidelines, the board approves the guidelines, and then we'll open a request for applications, which have additional detail. So that's where you'll see greater detail on the municipal infrastructure program, but the guidelines will provide you that framework for how we're prioritizing public ownership, how we're looking at other ways of approaching open access models, and then the initial proposal will give you some indication, particularly the consortium languages and edit we'll make in the coming days. And if you're particularly interested in that, again, either comment or let us know. We can follow up when we've added that language. And Kevin just dropped those guidelines in. Thank you, Kevin. Beth.
Hello. So if we went through the process of submitting the FCC challenges earlier this year, is the expectation that that's going to be included in the data that you guys have for the unserved, underserved?
That's the expectation, but so
the ones that were upheld, I guess, at least.
Exactly. So, but if you submitted them and they were upheld, then unless they've been since built to, that should persist in the data. But even the ones that were overturned, if you still think that you've got evidence that those are in fact unserved or underserved, then that is the evidence that you would submit to the ConnectALL office to adjudicate. So, the locations have to be on the FCC map, but just because the FCC has adjudicated one way or the other is not a predetermination of how the ConnectALL office would adjudicate the evidence that you would provide. So, that's where we are now. So, the best case scenario is now that we've gone through that process, the internet service provider has corrected their records, and the federal data will reflect the understanding that we all have of those locations. But if it doesn't, then the state challenge process is our last chance to make those changes. So blow the dust off that data if you still have it. If you've refreshed it, great. Take a look either now, share information with us, or be ready for when that challenge process opens to look at if the map that we're starting with, which will primarily, I think, be the data that's coming out later this month, if that aligns with your understanding.
Yeah, I think when we did that FCC challenge process, at the county level, we were kind of doing a very high level desktop GIS analysis, so that when the ISPs then came back to us, kind of challenging us back to provide the evidence, because we didn't necessarily have that direct line with the property owner, it was a little bit frustrating through kind of that tail end of the process. So here, I think you're kind of saying you're not going to have that one-to-one connection with residents, and you're going to be relying, I guess, on the municipalities, counties, whoever. So I guess I'm just trying to gauge, the level of effort between having gone through the FCC process and kind of expecting to do any challenges through this, whether, we just kind of let it ride as it is, or, go through that effort again.
No, I appreciate that effort. And I will say that, through the combined work of everybody participating in that challenge process and, and the continued changes that he was making, that contributed to, an additional, it's hard to put a dollar figure on it, but I think, our allocation might be as much as $150 million higher because of the work that we did, and much better reflects the the needs of the state. So thank you for that work. I know that it was a big lift at the time. I did not fully understand the consultative process and what that would entail, let alone how certain internet service providers and their attorneys would approach that process. So again, I appreciate that. But that consultative process where you get a direct response and have to engage one-on-one with the agency's auspices is not going to be part of our challenge process. It will be 30 days to challenge, 30 days to rebut, 30 days to adjudicate. So the sooner you get your challenge in, the better it'll be for us. But there's no point in the process where you and the ISP are going to directly interact to come to that determination. It's just, evidence, counter evidence, and then ConnectALL adjudicates. So, but again, hopefully the data now is going to be accurate from our perspective. And then, the last thing I'll say on that is that, the regional planning boards have been such an incredible resource in this process, and the economic development districts. So we've been talking to them about, if they can continue to provide technical assistance, if they're able to, we can provide some funding support, but that's still being worked out. But that's, we appreciate the burden that these multiple processes, flow, get placed on you all as they flow down from the feds to us, to you. So, Beth will also be providing workshops particularly as we stand up the actual platform that'll be used. So we'll, once we have that in place, we will show everybody how to use it, and usability is one of the key criteria for the vendor that we're evaluating for the challenge platform. So stay tuned for that opening in January.
Thanks. That was my next question. So thank you.
Okay. If anybody has any other questions, again, I just am incredibly appreciative of the work that you all do, and for taking the time today to, continue to get this overview of our current programs. And please take a look at them. And I will add my appreciation to the whole team at ConnectALL. Completing these documents within the federal requirements, getting them out for public comment, getting all 3 of them out for public comment on the same day, and being ready to mount this engagement campaign with stakeholders across the state is a significant lift, and I appreciate how hard my team and our consultants have worked to make that happen. So thank you to my team, and again, thank you to you all. All right, and that's 18 minutes that you can spend downloading and beginning to read those 3 documents. Thank you, Michael. Bye.
Thanks, Josh.